The night I called him, I was sitting on the floor of my own kitchen, back pressed against the cabinet under the sink, because it was the only corner of the apartment where I felt like the walls weren't closing in on me. My phone was in my hand. The screen was cracked. Marcus had thrown it against the counter 3 weeks earlier, and I'd told myself it was an accident. I told myself a lot of things were accidents back then. I scrolled through my contacts. Mom. I couldn't call her. She'd only say she told me so, and I didn't have the energy to hear it. Becca. We hadn't spoken in months because Marcus didn't like her. He said she was a bad influence. I believed him for a while. Then there was the name I stopped at. Vincent Cole. Work. I'd worked at Cole Holdings for 8 months, as an executive assistant to the man himself. Vincent Cole. The kind of person whose name made people at networking events go quiet and stand up a little straighter. I knew almost nothing about what exactly his company did. When you worked that close to someone like Vincent Cole, you learned very quickly that your job was not to ask questions. Your job was to anticipate, to organize, to disappear when you weren't needed, and to be there the moment you were. He had never given me his personal cell number. The number in my phone was the office line that rang his desk after hours. I pressed call anyway. It rang twice. Cole. His voice at 11 on a Thursday night sounded exactly the same as it did at 9 on a Monday morning. Like he hadn't been sleeping. Like he never needed to. I opened my mouth and what came out was almost nothing. A whisper. Half air. I'm sorry to call this late. I didn't know who else. I stopped, swallowed, started again. Is there any chance you could come get me? There was a silence on the other end. Not a long one, maybe 3 seconds. What's your address? Not a question. I noticed that. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He just asked where I was and something about that. The directness of it, the absence of any drama, made my throat close completely. I gave him my address. Don't open the door for anyone until I text you that I'm outside. The call ended. I sat there on the kitchen floor for 22 minutes, watching the front hallway, listening to the building creak around me. The overhead light in the living room was still on. Marcus's jacket was still on the hook by the door from when he'd left 2 hours ago, telling me he was going to his brother's place to cool down. I hadn't moved since. My phone buzzed. I'm outside. His car was a dark gray Range Rover, idling at the curb in the rain. I came out with nothing but my bag and my coat and the shoes I'd grabbed without bothering to tie properly. He got out when he saw me. He looked at my face. Just for a second, one quick scan, and then he opened the passenger door without saying a word. I got in. He went around to the driver's side. The seats were warm. The radio wasn't on. He drove. I didn't tell him where to go and he didn't ask. He just drove, north on Spadina, then east, then eventually onto the Gardner, where the city spread out in wet orange light ahead of us, and I sat with my hands folded in my lap and tried not to cry, because I'd already cried twice that night and I was so tired of it. After maybe 10 minutes, he said, "How long?" I looked over at him. His eyes were on the road. "I'm sorry? How long has it been like this?" I looked back at the windshield. The wipers swept back and forth, steady and even. "About a year," I said. "Maybe longer." I kept thinking it would. I exhaled. I kept making excuses. He didn't say anything to that. He didn't offer reassurance or tell me it wasn't my fault, or any of the things people said. He just nodded once, like I'd given him a piece of information he was filing away. That was the night I learned something about Vincent Cole that I hadn't understood in 8 months of working for him. He didn't say things he didn't mean, and so when he didn't say anything, it wasn't because he was indifferent. It was because he was thinking. He took me to a hotel, not a chain, a small boutique place near King West, the kind that looked like a converted Victorian house, and had a night clerk who knew his name and handed over a room key without a word of explanation needed. He carried my bag up the stairs even though I said I had it. He unlocked the room and checked it first, like that was a natural thing to do, and then he stepped aside and handed me the key. "You'll be paid for tomorrow," he said. "Don't come in." "Mr. Cole?" Violet. It was the first time he'd used my name that night. I don't know why it made me feel like I'd been steadied somehow, like someone had put a hand on my shoulder. "Thank you," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Not in a way that made me uncomfortable, in a way that felt more like assessment, like he was checking something off internally. "Don't thank me yet," he said, and then he left. I should explain who Marcus was, and who I was before him, because I think the story doesn't make sense otherwise. I moved to Toronto from Sudbury when I was 23. With a business administration degree, and the very specific brand of optimism that came from never having lived anywhere bigger than 160,000 people, I had a plan: entry-level admin work, evenings at the library studying for my CPA, a decent one-bedroom in the West End by the time I was 26. Simple, achievable, mine. Marcus came along at 24, at a work function for a company I temped for that winter. He was tall, well-dressed, funny, in exactly the way that made everyone in the room want to be near him. He told me I was the most interesting person he'd met in years, and I was lonely enough, and new enough to the city, that I believed him without asking what that actually meant. We moved in together after 7 months, his idea. I told myself I was ready. Within 3 months of living together, he'd told me my friends made me worse somehow, that I was more anxious around them. He said it kindly. He said it like a concern. He said it like he was looking out for me. And I was so careful about everything back then, so aware of how easy it was to be foolish, and somehow I couldn't see that the foolish thing was already happening. By the time I was 26, the only person I spoke to outside of work was Marcus. He didn't hit me. I want to be clear about that, because I think sometimes people hear abusive relationship, and they need something physical to make it make sense. What Marcus did was quieter. He made me feel, over the course of 2.5 years, that I was too much and not enough at the same time, that I was difficult to love, that the only reason things got hard between us was because of something fundamental in me that needed to be managed, corrected, worked around. He threw my phone at the counter. He said it was because I'd scared him, and that I should have known better than to bring up money stuff when he'd just come home from a stressful day. I told myself it was an accident. The night I called Mr. Cole, Marcus hadn't hit me. He'd grabbed my arm in the hallway outside our bedroom, hard enough that there were 4 finger-shaped bruises on my forearm by morning. And when I'd pulled away and told him to stop, he'd looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on him before. Flat, like I was something in his way, and walked out. And I'd slid down against the cabinets and thought, this is how it ends. Not with a single moment, with an accumulation. A bruise on my arm and the realization, arriving slow and certain, that I was not going to get out of this by being reasonable. I didn't know why I called Mr. Cole. I genuinely didn't. He wasn't warm, exactly. He didn't make small talk. He remembered things about what I'd told him, that I didn't drink coffee after noon, that I had a sister I rarely spoke to, that I'd grown up in Sudbury, and he used that information in practical ways, not personal ones. He was the most composed person I had ever met, and when you're drowning, sometimes the thing you reach for is the thing that seems most solid. He didn't come to the hotel the next day, or the day after that. On the 3rd day, his driver showed up with a bag of groceries and an envelope. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note on Cole Holdings' letterhead, which somehow seemed entirely in keeping with him, using corporate stationery for a personal message. The apartment has been cleared out. Your things are in storage. The address and access code are on the back. There's no further action required on your end. Take as much time as you need. VC. I read it 3 times. I called the office. His assistant at the front desk, a young guy named Brandon who was visibly afraid of everything, told me Mr. Cole was in meetings all day. I left a message. He didn't call back. It took me a week to understand what the apartment has been cleared out meant in practical terms, which was that Marcus had moved out. The lease, which had been in my name, something Marcus had insisted on for financial reasons he'd never fully explained, was paid through the end of the month. My things had been packed with what seemed like professional efficiency and moved to a storage facility 3 blocks from the hotel. There was a separate envelope in the unit when I went to check it, containing a receipt, a spare key, and a short printed note that simply said, "Your clothing has been dry cleaned." I stood in the middle of that storage unit, surrounded by the neatly boxed contents of 2.5 years of my life, and I cried for the first time since the kitchen floor. Not sad crying. The other kind. The kind that comes when you've been holding something so tight for so long that when it's finally lifted, your body doesn't know what to do with the absence of the weight. I went back to work on Monday. He was at his desk when I arrived at 8:47, which was 3 minutes late because the streetcar on King had been delayed, and I apologized as I came through the door. He looked up from whatever he was reading. "How are you sleeping?" he said. "Better," I said. "Thank you." For all of it. I don't. I'm not sure how to. You don't need to, he said, and looked back down at the papers in front of him. There are 3 messages from the Whitfield account on your desk, and the 9:30 will need the conference room set with water, not coffee. Henderson has a sensitivity to caffeine. And that was it. We went back to work, except that things were different, and I think we both knew it, even if neither of us said so. The first thing I noticed was that he started leaving earlier. Not by a lot, 15, 20 minutes. But he would stop by my desk on the way out, and sometimes he'd say something work-related, a reminder about a call the next morning, something to flag, and sometimes he'd just stop, not awkwardly. Just be there for a moment, check that I was still there, and then go. The second thing I noticed was that he started using my name. Not Miss Hartley, which was what he'd called me for 8 months. Just Violet, sometimes in the middle of a sentence, in a way that didn't have any particular weight but also wasn't casual, exactly. Like he'd decided something and adjusted accordingly. The third thing, and this one took me longer to notice, or maybe I didn't want to notice it, was that he started arriving at the same time as the coffee I ordered for myself at 9 every morning. Not because he'd arranged it. Because he was timing himself to be in the building by then. I didn't say anything about it, neither did he. Marcus found me in February. I don't know how he knew I was back in the apartment. I'd been back for 6 weeks, since the hotel stay had become untenable, both financially and emotionally. But he showed up on a Tuesday evening, when I was getting home from a grocery run, standing in the lobby of my building in a coat I didn't recognize, looking like he'd been rehearsing whatever he was about to say. I just want to talk, he said. Marcus, 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. He looked exactly like he always had. That was the thing about Marcus, he never looked like what he was. He had good posture and a nice face, and he knew how to make his voice sound soft and reasonable. And for a second, standing there with a bag of groceries cutting into my hand, I felt the old pull, the familiar gravity. There's nothing to talk about, I said, and I walked past him to the elevator. He grabbed my arm, same grip. I don't remember exactly what I said next. I know I told him to let go. I know my voice was louder than I expected it to be. I know that by the time the elevator doors opened, the woman from the 4th floor who I'd said hello to twice was standing in the lobby watching, and Marcus let go, and the look on his face was the flat one again. This isn't over, he said, quietly. I got in the elevator. I pressed 4. I watched the doors close. In my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Then I took out my phone and sent a text to the number I'd only used once before, from a kitchen floor 5 months ago. He came to my building tonight. He grabbed my arm again. I'm okay. I just thought you should know. The reply came in 40 seconds. I'll handle it. Lock your door. I almost typed back, it's not your problem. I almost typed, I'm sorry to bother you. I almost typed all the things I'd trained myself to say, all the apologies for taking up space. I typed, thank you. And then I locked my door. I didn't ask him what handle it meant. I didn't want to know, and I think he knew that, which was why he never told me. What I knew was that Marcus didn't come back. What I knew was that a week later, at the end of a Thursday that had been long and boring, and wonderfully peacefully ordinary, Cole, Vincent, stopped at my desk at 5:45 and said, "Have you eaten?" It wasn't a question, not really. Not since lunch, I said. He looked at me, the same assessing look, then, "There's a place on Wellington. They won't have a reservation for us, but they'll make one." I looked at him. "Is this a work dinner?" I said. "No," he said. I closed my laptop. His name, outside the office, was Vincent. Not Mr. Cole, not VC, not the abbreviated version that his board members used. Just Vincent. It took me 3 dinners to actually use it, and the first time I did, something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a small loosening, like a door that had been almost closed swinging open another inch. He called me Violet from the beginning, but somewhere around the 4th week, he started calling me Vi sometimes, casually, like it was something he'd always done. I noticed the first time. I didn't say anything. The second time, I was in the middle of a sentence, and I lost track of what I'd been saying entirely, and he looked at me with something that might, on another person's face, have been amusement. We learned each other slowly, not the way you learn someone when you're trying to impress them, the performed version of yourself, but the other kind of learning, where you're paying attention because the actual person is more interesting than whatever you thought you'd find. He grew up in Hamilton. His father had worked at Dofasco, and his mother had been a school secretary, and he had made his money, all of it, himself, starting at 22 with a logistics company that he'd sold at 27 and reinvested. He had a sister in Calgary he talked to every Sunday. He hadn't been in a serious relationship in 4 years. He didn't explain why, and I didn't ask. I told him about Sudbury, about how I'd left and spent the first year in Toronto, feeling like I was constantly running slightly late for something, like everyone else had been given instructions that I'd missed, about how Marcus had found me when I was lonely enough that I'd confused intensity with care. I said it like that, confused intensity with care, and Vincent looked at me for a moment. That's an accurate way to describe it, he said. I've had time to think it over, I said. You're not confused anymore. No, I said. I'm not. He nodded. He looked down at his glass. He said, I want to be clear about something. I waited. I'm not, he stopped. Started again precisely, like he was choosing the exact right words. What I feel for you is not uncomplicated. I'm aware of what my position is relative to yours professionally. I'm aware that the circumstances that brought you to me were not ones I would have chosen for you. He paused. But I think you're someone I'd like to know better, if that's something you want. I sat with that for a moment. Is that the version of this where you ask me to dinner? I said. Or the version where you already have and you're clarifying your intentions? The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Close, though. The second one, he said. Okay, I said. Good. Because the food here is actually excellent and I'd like to come back. This time he did smile. Just briefly. Like he'd been saving it. I wish I could tell you the healing was linear. That there was a point where I woke up one morning and felt entirely like myself again. Repaired, no scar tissue. That's not how it worked. There were weeks in the spring where I'd be fine. Genuinely fine, functional, even happy in a way that felt quiet and sustainable. And then something small would happen. A man raising his voice on the subway. A work email that used the wrong tone. Marcus's name appearing briefly on a news article about a company he'd invested in. And suddenly I'd be sitting at my kitchen table at midnight. Not sad exactly, just depleted, like something had taken all the air out of the room. I saw a therapist, a woman named Dr. Park who worked out of an office on Bloor Street and had the particular gift of making long silences feel productive rather than uncomfortable. She helped me understand, slowly, that what I'd been through had a name, that the name didn't diminish it or define me, and that the confusion I felt, the leftover loyalty, the grief for a relationship that had also been hurting me, was not weakness but exactly what anyone would feel. Vincent knew I was going, because I'd had to adjust my schedule for the Tuesday appointments. He didn't ask about it, but on Tuesdays, my afternoon was always cleared by noon, without explanation. I mentioned it once, just in passing. You didn't have to do that, I said. I know, he said. In June, he took me to his sister's place in Calgary for a long weekend. Her name was Diane, and she was 3 years older than him and worked in environmental engineering, and had 2 kids under 6 who called their Uncle Vinny in a way that visibly pained him. I sat at her kitchen table on Saturday morning and watched him build a block tower with her 4-year-old, getting it knocked down repeatedly, and thought, there it is, that's the rest of him. Diane sat next to me with her coffee. He talks about you, she said. Does he? I said, surprised. He doesn't talk about people, she said. So yes. I looked at him. He'd noticed us watching and gave his nephew a very serious look about the structural integrity of the base before the kid demolished it anyway. He's a good person, I said. He's a complicated person, Diane said, but yeah, with the right people, yeah. I did something in August that I want to tell you about because I think it matters to the story. I called my mom. We hadn't spoken properly in almost 2 years. Not because of a fight, exactly. More because of the slow accumulation of distance, of conversations that stayed surface level, of the version of myself I'd become under Marcus that didn't fit easily into the family I'd come from. She picked up on the second ring. Violet, she said, and she sounded so immediately relieved that I had to press my hand against my mouth for a second. We talked for 2 hours, I told her. Not everything, not yet, but enough. She didn't say she'd told me so. She didn't offer advice I hadn't asked for. She just listened, and she said, at one point, I kept waiting for you to call, and I said, I know, I'm sorry. And she said, don't be sorry. Just, are you okay now? Are you actually okay? I'm getting there, I said, and I meant it. Vincent proposed in October, which surprised me and also didn't. We were at the cottage he rented every fall north of Huntsville, and it was the kind of evening where the lake was perfectly still, and the trees were every shade of orange and red, and the air smelled like wood smoke from the neighbors, 2 lots down. We'd made dinner together, his pasta, my attempt at garlic bread, which was better than expected, and we were sitting on the dock with a bottle of wine watching the light go out of the sky. He said my name, Violet. Not Vi, which is what he usually called me now. The full version, which he reserved for things he wanted me to pay attention to. I turned to look at him. He had the ring already. I found out later he had had it for 2 months. A simple oval sapphire that suited me better than he probably knew. Or maybe he knew exactly. He didn't get down on one knee. He wasn't that kind of person. He just held it out and he looked at me and he said, "I'd like to spend the rest of my life with you, if that's something you want." The same construction as the first time, almost. If that's something you want, like it was always going to be my choice. I looked at the ring in his hand. I looked at the lake. I thought about the kitchen floor. I thought about 8 months of ordering his coffee and rerouting his calls and learning the particular rhythm of a person from a distance. I thought about a phone call at 11 on a Thursday night that changed everything, and a voice that said, "What's your address?" like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Yes," I said. "It's something I want." He put the ring on my finger, and his hand stayed around mine, and for a long time after that neither of us said anything at all, just sat there in the last of the October light, while the lake went dark, and the stars came out one by one overhead. I didn't need to say anything else. Neither did he. That had always been the thing about us, I realized, the thing that had been true from the beginning, from a cracked phone screen and a whispered phone call, and a man who drove through rain without asking why. We had always said the important things without saying very many words at all, and I had never in all my life felt so completely understood.